Well, thank you very much and welcome to the 14th session of the International IVF Initiative. I'm honored and excited to be co-hosting this session with Marlane Angle. For videos and previous sessions, please go to ivfmeeting.com. You will also find information about upcoming sessions on that same page. Our goal, as ever, is to support the IVF community during this COVID-19 pandemic and provide educational opportunities, bringing us all together. So thanks for logging in, listening to us, and please ask those questions. So my name is Giles Palmer. We have an amazing program planned for the next 80 minutes or so. A very special subject, seldom do we touch. It's about our profession, about mental health. Not the COVID-induced stress that we're all facing at the moment, but the pressures and pains that come with our profession. So leading on, I'm going to go to my partner in crime, Marlane Angle. I say tomato.
And I say tomato, Giles. Maybe we should call the whole thing off. No, we'll proceed. Evaristo, Giles. All right, we would like to encourage everyone to take the survey that we've put together to investigate stress and burnout amongst IVF lab staff worldwide. If you did not receive an email about this survey, you can find it on the IVF meeting website. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey. And if you haven't completed the survey, if you've started it but not finished, please do complete it. We cannot use incomplete surveys. So thank you in advance. Also, please note that all questions you ask of the speakers today must be asked through the Q&A feature. It's at the bottom of your screen. Panelists and speakers will not be responding to questions asked on the chat function. Submitted questions will be answered either verbally or by the speakers or in writing by panelists today or after the session. Answers will be posted on the website. In addition, please don't use the Q&A session or section for solicitation for your company or products. Thank you, and back to you, Giles.
Thank you very much. So before we begin, I'll just give an overview of today's theme. It's not to criticize, it's to shine a light on this subject. It's been touched upon, but our work is a highly skilled job with targets, where scientists race to do more and to do better. But what happens if we don't meet these goals? Our job is obviously precise and still relies very much on manual skills. But modern regulations dictate we must spend more and more time away from our labs and doing administration work or admin work. We did a study a few years ago in Wales. It was presented at Alpha, and we saw that the time spent by an embryologist or an IVF scientist was about 21% of his time. And the majority of that was doing menial paperwork or just doing data processing. Well, there's been many papers that have looked at burnout, but this has been to do with clinicians in relation to the disassociation that they've had between their work and their admin work, with medical records and suffering from inbox overload. And Menick at Yale last year pointed out there's a strong relationship between the administration work and the burnout factors. And there's a very popular paper by Christina Sinsky, who was a very quoted paper, that shows that around 50% of a doctor's time can be spent away from a patient doing these chores. But again, nothing which addresses the reproductive scientist. And in the global setting of things, many countries do not have an official recognition of the profession. The EODRSO Steering Committee in 2015 had a look at the countries in Europe, and we saw that only 3 out of 27 national health services recognize embryology as a profession. And there's been no real consensus on the minimum staffing which should be allowed. Is it 100 simulated cycles per embryologist, 150, 200? It's still not very clear. And with this aim, Mina Alicandi produced a staff calculator which worked out a more detailed approach. I shan't test you on this equation, but I wonder how many people actually follow these rules when we're talking about staffing. So over to you, Marlane.
Well, there's been quite a bit of research done on physician burnout. There has not been much research done on embryology, mental health, and burnout. And we partially hope to address that with our survey. However, there has been some. Certainly, Dr. Helen Priddle has done some work through ACE in the UK, which you'll hear more about today. In addition, Dr. Jose Castilla and his team from Granada, Spain, have published an extensive paper on Spanish embryology health that we would like to encourage everyone to read. Dr. Castilla will also speak briefly today. And Dr. Ali Domar, a mental health professional, has published extensively in the area of infertility patient mental health. But these patient mental health and embryologist patient health, I think embryologist health, have several points of convergence. So I think we'll be hearing what we will hear from her today will be very applicable. And finally, in 2018, the Society for Reproductive Biologists and Technologists, which is a sub-society of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, investigated burnout and stress briefly in their salary and job satisfaction survey. During the survey, they asked 2 questions regarding stress in the workplace, and they reported first that almost 89% of all working IVF professionals have reported experiencing moderate to high levels of stress during the course of their job. And I have to say, I'm certainly part of that 89%. And I think part of the reason is what I refer to as a mantle of blame, that we as embryologists take it on ourselves to be accountable and responsible. And sometimes we're assigned that mantle without it being voluntary, but nonetheless, most of us are very conscientious and want to make sure we're doing a good job, and that results in stress. Secondly, approximately 61% of IVF professionals have experienced significant job burnout. So the point of our survey and this session is to expand on information available to give us more ammunition, if you will, to begin to help ourselves and our staff deal with these issues. Our first speaker has a significant amount of experience dealing with stress and burnout among other professionals. Dr. Bryan Tully has spent most of his professional life as a clinical, forensic, and occupational psychologist in the UK and Hong Kong. He worked with many stress and burnout issues as an organizational psychologist or consultant with the National Health Service, the Royal Hong Kong Police Force, and the American consultancy RHR International. Please welcome Dr. Tully.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, depending where you are. My talk is to give some background ideas on the psychology, the research on burnout in general. I'm not a specialist in the field of embryology. In the English language, burnout is a very vivid word, so most people think they know roughly what it means. Something to do with stress, something to do with mental health. We owe a great deal to Dr. Christina Maslach at the University of California back in the 1970s, who was one of the pioneers, she and her team, into looking at the components of burnout. Initially, she was interested in the caring professions. So we've heard about physicians and of course nurses, social workers, police, people who have to deal with members of the public, often the public suffering difficulties. But it soon became clear that burnout was possible in other professions, especially where those professionals entered with very high ideals, very high goals and expectations, expecting satisfaction, and thinking their work was going to be of great personal significance. It didn't always work out that way. Now, there have been a number of scales to measure the personal experience of burnout. Probably Christina Maslach's own scale, the Maslach Burnout Inventory, MBI, is the most familiar to people. So later on, Dr. Priddle and Dr. Domar are going to talk about some of the conditions and experiences of burnout in the assisted reproduction field, but I'm just going to touch on the main items that we have found across professions. So complying with very heavy and strict regulatory frameworks, that won't surprise anyone. Working with difficult people, difficult personalities, maybe the public, colleagues, customers, stakeholders. Taking the blame for mistakes which are very visible and which may be unfair, but the environment is very fragile, so you get blamed. And dealing with very high workloads, not only in the number of hours, but the uncertainty of having to work inconvenient hours. So you can see how that would work for police as well as embryologists. Let me just summarize then what the modern view of burnout is. Most people can understand the element of emotional exhaustion. That's a primary component, and that's been described as being feeling worn out, a loss of energy, depletion, debilitation, fatigue. A person has become overstretched emotionally in their work. But Mashlak and her colleagues, and other researchers as well, found there were other components to burnout which were just as important in relation to both mental health and productivity. So one of these has been called variously depersonalization, alienation, or cynicism. And this is basically a building of attitudes which are inappropriate, where the professional no longer really cares about what they're doing and takes a very negative view of their customers and colleagues. That can be very undermining. And the other component of burnout is a clear and recognizable lack of sense of personal efficacy. That is the sense the person has that they are an effective professional in their work. That's a very clear. So these components, they don't always come together in the same person at the same time. Someone who's suffering burnout a lot is likely to progress through a number of these to different degrees. That can make it tricky to assess. One of the things that people do notice within the assisted reproductive profession is that some people have personalities which seem well suited and some not so well suited. There is actually very, very little research in this area. So I'm just relying on anecdotal commentary to say that it looks as though someone working within that setting, if they're going to be effective and happy at it, they're probably going to be extrovert up to a point, socially outgoing enough to be able to talk to other people. These are, I'm mentioning now the big 5 personality attributes, which is probably the best established scientific view of personality. Then you would expect them to have a degree of stability and not get overwrought and overly emotional and can talk to other people. So they'd be stable, not emotionally unstable. You expect that. Conscientiousness is probably the most important trait that you would expect in this profession, perhaps very highly. Some people are very conscientious, and it is possible to get too conscientious, to be perfectionist, to be obsessional. So there could be an issue there. Then you expect people who have ideals to be open-minded to new technologies, new ideas, at least up to a point. And you expect them to be agreeable or easygoing, again, up to a point. Now, just because the research in this area has been so limited, what must happen is that people find themselves doing work in which their interests and their inclinations are not necessarily very well fitted. Before I go on to talk about the organizational aspects of work settings which aggravate burnout, let me just talk on a positive note of what would be a good organization, a supportive organization where burnout would be mitigated. First of all, such an organization or work setting would offer adequate resources and training. It would provide for a degree of autonomy which smart people want in the way that they do their work. You would expect a degree of reputational effectiveness for the organization so that people are proud to work there. You would expect some pathways so that staff can influence policy and have a say in what's going on. You would expect a valuation of work sharing, especially when the demand goes up. And you would expect some kind of program which would nurture the way that people relate one to another. You'd expect the organization to understand when people do get burned out or have other mental health problems, and that they would provide in-house or out-of-house support for those people. You would expect such an organization to be wary of a climate where bullying, unfairness, abuse, discrimination is significantly present, and the organization appears needs to do something about it. So in a supportive organization, there should be clear policies on that. Well, that's ideal. I don't know how many of you are going to vote for your organizations in that way. But let me now turn to what makes an aggravating organization. Yes, I do love this slide, actually. Giles put it up. So in an organization that aggravates burnout, what you would expect there is that they're not supporting people beyond training for the most elementary technical aspects of the work. They are ignoring the social demands and the political know-how that goes with working in an organization. They're not really making staff feel both challenged and supported at the same time, which is what professionals really want. They're not really expressing a degree of joint commitment to a set of values, sort of thing you might get in a police organization or a Montessori school. I hope you understand that. And they lack the kind of in-house, out-of-house specialist resources. They may not even talk about burnout. You expect in such an aggravating, unsupportive organization that they've given very little time and effort to whether the personality fit is right between the person and the work they have to do. It's all too easy to just simply get fed up with someone and terminate their employment, but that is hardly fair. There may be what social scientists call a mechanical bureaucracy. I think you can understand the metaphor here, where the way decisions are made are based on numbers and very formal standardized routines, and the human element tends to get lost. Where unreasonable time pressures are ignored, poor levels of communication with line managers, and very poor role clarity. That's another term used by social scientists to refer to the fact that the expectations of what is really wanted from professionals is simply not very clear, and where there is a toleration of unfairness. Now, what we know in general from other professions then is that there are a number of poor outcomes, including discrete, clear mental health problems, absenteeism, poor productivity, and people resigning before it's really a good time for them to do so. You lose good people. And as I think we're going to hear from Dr. Duran, the poor climate of social relationships inside an organization can spill over into the way they treat their customers, and then you lose customers and you lose productive value. Let me just talk a little bit about the survey which you've been asked to complete. Let me thank you for doing so. This survey, we've tried to keep it so that it's no more than 10 or 15 minutes. That's all. But it will provide us with an opportunity to make international comparisons which have never been possible before. There has been some very good work in Spain, as we've heard, and they certainly determined that there were aspects of burnout and mental health problems and work pressure and gender difficulties as well. And their article is packed with useful facts for Spain. But I think we need to see if we're getting similar pictures elsewhere. if you complete the questionnaire, what we're going to get at the end is a set of indexes, internationally compared. Now, one index will be on self-reported burnout experience. So that'll be good to see how that varies with different countries, how much experience and how long people have been in the profession. We'll also have an index of the outcomes of health and performance, how far those are impaired. We'll also, for the first time, have an index of the perceived organizational support or excellence. So we'll see in which countries and which professionals find that their organizations are doing the right thing. And then there will be an index of unsupportive, aggravating organizations where you find a lot of burnout. That will be the first time we've been able to get that. And there's a final section because we don't believe we've covered every single thing. There's a huge number of issues here. And we have left a section for you to tell us the things that we've left out or things that might be more important and we haven't realized. And that will give us a great deal of assistance in taking things forward. So I am finishing on my request to you to please complete those forms, and we will be able to get back to you with some very interesting and important information. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tully. That was excellent, and really shining a light, perhaps for the first time, on the profession. We've got a lot of questions and we've got a lot to get through, but your experience with burnout, do you think we're special as embryologists? Do you think there's anything you pick when you're in investigating all the stresses that we have and the particular things?
Well, I think if there's one thing I've learned both within health services and the police, is that professionals in those services will say that a lot of the stress comes from their own organization. And therefore, whilst of course the individual may turn for therapy and help and support from their peers, it is just as important that someone is working with the organization as well. So the practitioner, the ideal practitioner, should have a voice to the board, to the top people in the management, as well as talking and working with people at the ground level.
Okay, thank you. And because you mentioned the Spanish study, if I could bring in Dr. Castilla to ask a question. It's a very thorough study, and we certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel with the survey which we're doing here. Jose, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, could I ask you, what explanation, and in your paper you saw there was a high prevalence of burnout with the embryologists, and perhaps enlighten us on that, and perhaps differences with the gender, perhaps?
Yes, all right. But first of all, I would like to thank you for taking our research into account. And that's all right. I would like to try to explain why we have observed that 36% of Spanish embryologists have obtained a high score in the MASLAT burnout inventory, especially in two components of the MASLAT burnout inventory. In the component that the previous speaker had mentioned, exhaustion. And we think that the highest score in exhaustion of the Spanish embryology is related to overload. We are overwhelmed because we carry out a lot of clinical activity in the lab, but also we have contact with kind and friendly patients, but also with difficult patients. We spend a lot of time doing research, teaching young embryologists, and also we carry out a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy. Also, we believe that the high score in exhaustion of the Spanish embryologists is related to the lack of control over result and decision making. We believe that we are kept out of the decision making process. We do things that we don't agree with. And on the other hand, the high score in the cynicism is related, according to our opinion, to the absence of desire to succeed or indifference and an impression of a lack of opportunity for development. This factor could result in a diminished sense of professional worth, low self-esteem, and a feeling of frustration and boredom. Probably is because in Spain there isn't an official recognition of our specialty. But we don't forget that in Spain is the third country in the world in the number of cycles of IVF carried out in a year, after Japan and United States. We are not recognized as embryologists. We are ignored by the authorities of the health minister. We hope that this situation will change in the future with the opportunity that this webinar gives us to be heard by millions of people, especially by the Spanish authority, and our professional situation will change in the future. And the second part of your question is an unexpected result in our study. We have observed that being female is the biggest risk factor for poor mental health in embryology. We believe that this worse mental health in female embryologists than male embryologists could due to several factors. Firstly, they are more responsible for the housework, and women usually find it more difficult to have a good work-life balance. And secondly, they are more demanding of themselves, more self-critical. They try to live up to the expectation. They believe others have obtained. Women are more concerned about what other people think of them. We think that if we don't focus our preventative measure on female, probably they won't work. And we don't forget, we don't have to forget that around 85% of our colleagues are female. This is the most important issue, the most important finding in our job.
Okay, thank you very much. And you touched on a lot of subjects, and we'll come back to that as well. One, of course, being that by shining light on this subject, and it's multifaceted, it is a chance to air things without criticism and to see where we can improve as a profession, but also as we can improve our working environment. But now I'd like to move to our other speaker. This is Helen Priddle. Helen Priddle gained a PhD in molecular biology, working with embryonic stem cells, and was an academic scientist until 2006, when she retrained as a clinical embryologist. She worked in several laboratories, but is now at the London Women's Clinic in Wales. Helen had the honour of holding the position of Treasurer at the Association of Clinical Embryologists, ACE as it was then, from 2016 to 2019, with additional qualifications including psychotherapy. So Helen has many strings to her bow with a keen interest in well-being. So take it away, Helen.
Thanks, Giles, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. So I just wanted to run through some UK-based data that we have.
Perhaps a little bit of volume.
Yep. Okay, can you hear me okay?
A smidge more, Bamy. Let's have a go.
Yep, okay.
Perfect.
Lovely. So I'm going to talk through the UK survey data that we did. So just as a note, just to let you know that the survey was done initially by the Association of Clinical Embryologists, which we joined together with the Association of Biomedical Andrologists and the British Andrology Society in January 2020 to become the Association of Reproductive and Clinical Scientists. So that's a new joint society of reproductive scientists now. So the survey was conducted in January 2018, going out by email to 405, so that's the whole membership of ACE at that point. We had an unusually high response rate of 62.2% there. So that to us immediately said that this was a subject that was really important to a lot of people. We're currently drafting a publication with the results in it, so hopefully this should be available for everyone to read in detail at some point soon. The respondents reflected at least 80 UK treatment centres and also some members who were responding from overseas as well. So what did we find? So we were looking generally to see what occupational health issues were experienced by UK embryologists, because we had noticed in the executive committee that a number of us were experiencing some issues. And from our respondents, we found that 130 people were affected by occupational health issues. So that's just over half of the respondents there. Quite unusually, we found that the majority of those who had experienced occupational issues were experiencing more than one issue. And we were looking specifically at 9 different issues that we predefined. So this graph will just briefly show you what those were. And you can see those 4 largest bars there were for stress and mental health problems and for 3 different musculoskeletal disorders. So those were the most prevalent things that we saw there. We also gave an opportunity to speak about other issues, and 9 other issues were mentioned. The most commonly mentioned was issues relating to the use of liquid nitrogen. So obviously, we're focusing on the mental health aspect, and that was up there in terms of the most prevalent 2 things that were experienced by UK embryologists. And roughly a quarter of embryologists were experiencing or had experienced some form of stress or mental health problems. So this really is a lot of embryologists sticking their hands up and saying, "We're stressed, please take note." Now, how does this compare to the general working population? Is this a normal kind of figure? Well, in the UK in 2019, the statistics from the Health and Safety Executive found that overall working people in all industries, about 13.8% were experiencing some form of stress or mental health problem. So you can see that this figure for embryologists is higher than the overall working population. And it compares quite well to what is reputedly the most stressed industry, which is health and social work, which was experiencing at that time, 21.2% were experiencing stress and mental health issues. This is in agreement with the Spanish study that did flag up mental health being poorer in the embryologists than in the general population, with high levels there of burnout, and we've heard about that today already. So, what is it that is causing this stress in our group of embryologists? So we did have opportunities for embryologists to comment on specific things and to say some qualitative things as well as yes-no answers. And I just wanted to share with you some of that information that we've had back there, just to get a picture of what it is that's leading to this stress in labs around the UK. So, short-staffed. So not having enough personnel to conduct the procedures that are going on obviously is a problem. Having a lack of breaks, so having to keep going without being able to stop for long periods of time. Working for long hours, so doing overtime, working weekends. And then all of those hours being within a laboratory environment with no windows, lots of equipment, not a great deal of space. That can be quite a claustrophobic environment as well. And of course, we're being very highly manually dexterous and highly focused and concentrated in what we're doing. And the difficult procedure, we're having to perform them under pressure. And some people have reported that this has led to an increase in their blood pressure. And we've talked again, or previously, about the fear of making mistakes. So that's something that's lurking in everyone's consciousness while they're performing these difficult procedures. And it has been mentioned the blame culture that has resulted. And some people even have reported bullying. and a lack of understanding of the work that they're required to do. So when somebody determines a theatre list for the day, we'll do this number of patients, but without actually really appreciating what that translates to in terms of workload in the laboratory. So that again links into poor management. So this paints a pretty bleak picture of what the experience is for some people in some labs some of the time, but this does give an idea of what the kind of stresses are that are leading to this phenomenon. And this does reflect as well general factors that are seen to be prevalent in workplace stress. So the HSE, they did a survey looking at what people were reporting as factors involved in their workplace stress, and you can see there that workload was well up there and lack of support, even some reports of threats and bullying. So these things are the things that we've had mentioned as well. The WHO has a program of policies for mental health in the workplace, and that also reports on factors that it believes are important in workplace stress. And up the top there again is workload, lack of control over the workload that you're having to do. I'm not going to go into this list in details, but obviously you can see what kind of things we're looking at there. But what is the solution to these problems? Again, the WHO has mentioned in its workplace mental health policies what the solutions could be. Certainly, the first thing would be to increase the awareness of mental health issues in employees and supporting the employees that are at risk of stress. And that can include providing treatment for people who develop mental health problems. Obviously, we need to be looking at changing the organisation of work as well, so that we can mitigate stress in that way. And when people do return to work after being absent with mental health problems, we need to reintegrate them in a sensible way, so not just throwing them straight back into the same situation that caused the problem in the first place. So that first potential thing we can work on there is increasing awareness, and we need to do that at every level, so right from training courses. So I investigated 4 of the master's courses in the UK, and all of them recognise the importance of raising awareness of stress, yet there's no specific content in place, but that is something that we could start looking into, is starting making sure that we're delivering information and training on recognising the risks and signs of stress in the workplace. We need to make sure the embryology teams are aware of potential stress and how to look out for that signs of that occurring. But not just the embryology team, all of the teams need to be aware of stress in the workplace, and we need to look out for each other across teams as well. And of course, the centre managers and human resources, they need to be aware of this as well, and the support staff that may well be supporting people experiencing stress and mental health problems. We can change the way we organise work to try and mitigate some of these factors as well. So we can obviously look at staffing levels, and this is something that's come up a few times. We need sufficient staff to be able to do each procedure with sufficient time, and to be able to take breaks regularly, and to be able to rotate between tasks, so we're not continuously doing the same thing for 8 hours. And we don't need to be multitasking. Obviously that can detract from the concentration on the skill and increase stress as well. And we need time to get that administration done. I can't say that we all love it, but it does nag when it's not done, and we do need to be allocated specific time to be able to get that done. The quality management system as well, we can be looking at that. So obviously we all have systems of flagging up when things don't go right, but do we need a culture of blame and shame? Well, that's certainly not helpful. We don't need it. We need a culture of learning and improvement, and it's a very fine balance of how we manage that to make that work effectively. We all want to do our jobs well. We just need to be supported to be able to do that. So how do we support people who are at risk of suffering from mental health problems? So the first thing we need to be doing is looking at the risks and where they lie in an organisation, and we can use tools to do that. There are tools out there. We've heard of the Maslach burnout inventory, which can be used to look at burnout, obviously. In the UK, the Health and Safety Executive have a stress indication tool, or SIT as it's known, which can be tailored for every individual workplace and sent out online to all of its members to look to see what it flags up as particular issues in that workplace. We need to support the people who are under stress. This can be through occupational health, counselling, or if we haven't got that in-house, we can be looking to make it flexible for people to attend appointments outside of the workplace. And as I said before, we need to reintegrate people back into the workplace if they've been off with stress in a sensible way, not immediately throwing them back into the deep end there. So we do have not only a moral duty, but certainly in the UK, and I presume in other countries as well, we have a legal duty as well to look after our employees. In the UK, we have the Health and Safety at Work Act. So the employer has a legal responsibility to look after the health and safety of all employees, but the employees as well have a duty to look after their own health and safety and that of their colleagues around them. The regulator in the UK, the HFEA, it's a condition of the licence that there should be sufficient personnel within the centre to conduct the treatments that it's taking on. In the UK, we are all state registered as embryologists, and there are standards that our regulator or our registrar, the Healthcare and Professions Councils, expect of us. And we need to be able to manage our workload so that we have the right resources to be able to be effective. Now, if we can't personally manage our own workload, then we need to be flagging up when that becomes an issue. We also, and people may not think about this very much, but it is a part of our registration, we also need to be really aware of when our stress, our mental health conditions, or any medications that we're taking are affecting our performance or our judgment, and maybe compromising our ability to do our work well. So that is a condition of our registration in the UK. And professional bodies, so in the UK, EODRSO has a thing or two to say about this, and in their code of conduct, we are saying that people need to report when we can see that the health and safety of colleagues is at risk, because that can compromise standards of care. So, what's the take home from all of this? And I would say that there are stressed embryologists out there. We need to be looking out for them, watching out for the things that are stressing them, watching out for them getting stressed, and then we need to step in and try and mitigate some of those factors. The long and short of it is we all need to be looking out for each other and taking care and mitigating what we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That was delightful, and I have so many questions, but let me just ask you one, and it's not going to be the one I asked you yesterday. Sorry, but you know, I've been a lab director for 30 years, and I think the reality is I still feel exquisitely unprepared for dealing with stress amongst my lab staff. And even just something as simple as the recognition of mental illness. I just am not sure this is something I've ever been educated on. Are there any programs you're aware of that we as laboratory professionals can participate in to help learn how to recognize and how to deal with this in our laboratories and improve teamwork amongst our staff?
That's a good question, and certainly I know that that kind of thing is few and far between. We do at ARCS have programs of CPD sort of exercises where we do look into management and leadership skills. Those kind of things, I think we need to be talking a lot more about, and it's kind of a big thing that we all end up in positions of responsibility with training in the basic tools of embryology, but very little training in how to look after other members of the team, how to deal with the politics and everything else that goes with management in the laboratory. And certainly it can be a challenge though, because from a sort of psychological perspective, every individual experiencing stress will show that in a different way, and to some degree I think getting to know the people that you work with and knowing what their norm is like and what their tells are, it's quite a challenging thing, but it's quite a people skill as well. So yeah, it's a big thing.
I totally agree, and I think in many instances it's well beyond what's traditionally taught in leadership training, the classic leadership training. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm sure there will be more questions for you in the Q&A session. Thank you very much. I wanted to take just a minute though and bump to Shaista. Shaista is sort of the representation of youth within our group. Can we get Shaista up on the
right here, Marlene.
Oh, you're there. Great. Excellent. So as a young person who's still relatively, you're not new in this profession, but you know, compared to me, you are. And I know you're pursuing your master's at Eastern Virginia Medical School. So one of the things I wanted to know is, have you had any courses that address these kinds of issues? I'm going to guess you haven't, but do you feel like you're prepared to deal with this? We're doing a lot of training and education and hoping you will be one of the future generation that steps into arenas like mine when I'm stepping out. Do you feel like you're prepared to deal with this?
So to answer your initial question, no. Eastern Virginia Medical School also doesn't have any sort of course that specifies or talks about the pressures or the stress or the burnout. I don't know of any program that does, and I think it's a good topic to address because I think it should be covered in those courses. For me, my experience was a little different. I spent many years being an embryologist before taking that course. I know that there are other people in my course that have different experience levels. Some people are still trying to get their foot into the door, so they have no experience with burnout. So I think it depends on what level you're at, because I know when I first started as an embryologist, a junior embryologist, you're still training. There's not that much responsibility on your shoulders. It's a very slow process. The training process is in itself a very slow process. So in the beginning, it was all hunky-dory. But I think the more time you spend in the field, the more responsibility you get, the more trust you earn of the people around you. And so it kind of builds up. But I think it's definitely something that we should think about incorporating into the courses in the programs that we have.
Oh, I totally agree. And that was not to call out Eastern Virginia Medical School in any way. I just, you know, as Helen said, I don't think this is traditionally addressed anywhere. And obviously, I think is a weak point in our education for our up and coming senior embryologists. Thank you. We will get back to all of our speakers with more questions as we go along. But right now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ali Domar. Ali is a psychologist who focuses on the application of mind-body medicine to women's health issues and the relationship between stress and infertility. She's the author of 7 books, is on the board of Parents Magazine, and has served on the board of Resolve. She's the executive director of the Domar Centers for Mind-Body Health, the Director of Integrative Care at Boston IVF and an Associate Professor of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Biology at Harvard Medical School. I first became acquainted with Dr. Domar's work several years ago when we were setting up a stress reduction program for our patients. I think I need to set this up for our staff. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Domar.
Thanks so much, Marlane, and thanks to everybody for inviting me to speak today. There are two things that I wanted to say before I went on to my formal presentation. One is that, yes, I am a psychologist who primarily does deal with infertility patients, but over the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years of my career, I've done a lot of teaching, first at Boston IVF for embryology staff, and then across the US and internationally, teaching, stress management, teaching prevention, burnout strategies. So this is an area I feel pretty comfortable with. I have a pretty good sense from our staff at Boston IVF about some of the challenges that embryology staff face. The second thing is just a comment. I think we have to be careful mixing up the term stress and burnout with mental illness, because I think that for somebody who works in an embryology lab to experience stress and be at risk of burnout does not necessarily mean that person is mentally ill. I think in our world, we would call it adjustment disorder. I wouldn't call it, depression or anxiety or anything like that. So from what I can tell from working with embryologists, it's not so much mental illness as it is a really normal reaction to a highly stressful situation. I don't have any disclosures for this presentation. And to be honest, this presentation normally takes me an hour. And Marlane asked me, how am I going to do this in 15 minutes? And I said, I'm from Boston and we talk really fast, but I do understand this is an international audience, so I will try to slow down. I was actually interviewed by a reporter this morning on burnout because it's, it's worldwide right now during this pandemic. And she asked me for the definition of burnout versus the definition of stress. And there are times where I don't think it's so different. So the way I define stress is it's the consequence of not having the resources in your life to meet the demands. And so you can be stressed by not enough money. You can be stressed by not enough time. You can be stressed by poor health, and you can be stressed by lack of social support, or 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those. And it really depends on your resources. So, right now, Bill Gates may be worried about his health, but he's probably not really stressed by money. And, I think we have to look, when you start feeling stressed, you need to stop and think, what are my resources here? There are lots and lots of symptoms of stress. My guess is that since you're all adults, you might have a sense of how your mind and body react when you're stressed. The symptoms of stress can be physical, they can be psychological, they can be behavioral, and I'm going to go over some of those symptoms because I think it's really important for all of us to be able to tune in. Our minds and bodies are not subtle. So when there is stress or distress or potential for burnout, our mind sends out all these signals. And the problem is we don't necessarily interpret those signals as our body sort of crying out for help, but we tend to medicate or ignore our symptoms. So I'd like you just to think for a minute, do you know what your stress-related symptoms are? I know for me, when I'm stressed, I can't sleep. My husband falls asleep no matter what, but then he gets neck pain. And have you noticed any new symptoms during the course of the last few months, which a lot of people have? So the most common physical symptoms are insomnia, and that's either having trouble falling asleep or waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to get back to sleep, or waking up early in the morning and not be able to get back to sleep. Headache, neck pain, back pain, fatigue. Gastrointestinal symptoms are the second most common form of stress-related symptoms. Abdominal pain, shortness of breath, menstrual issues. There's joint pain. There's lots more, but these tend to be the most common. There are emotional symptoms. So sometimes you might be feeling physically fine, but you might be irritable or, feeling tense or on edge. You might feel lonely. You might feel sad. These are all symptoms of stress. And again, you need to check in. And if you think you're acting fine, you might want to check in with people around you to see if they think you're acting normally, because sometimes we aren't even aware of how we are projecting our moods on other people. There are also cognitive symptoms. You don't think about this, but forgetfulness is a very common symptom of stress. Constant worrying, I'd say every single one of my patients has said that with the pandemic for the first couple of weeks, they were just worried all the time. They felt afraid, they felt they had poor judgment, they couldn't think clearly. And these are all cognitive symptoms of stress. So men and women tend to have different behaviors when they are stressed. And you know, if you were live, I'd say, hey, what do you think are the top 2 behavioral changes in men? So how do men's behaviors change when they're stressed? The answer is men, when they're stressed, tend to watch more television and they tend to drink more alcohol. Do you think women have the same stress reaction? And I'll tell you, no, women do not. Their top 2 are not TV or alcohol. For women, what we do is we exercise less and we eat more junk food, either sweet or salty. So if you think about it, these top 4 behavior changes, which is drinking more alcohol, watching more TV, exercising less, and eating more junk food, it means our instincts are really off, because none of those 4 things are going to decrease your stress level. And in fact, all 4 of those things are going to increase your stress level. So all of us need to be very conscious about acquiring accurate and reliable ways to decrease our stress level. These are more behavioral symptoms. Actually, gum chewing, teeth grinding, nail biting, pacing, using cigarettes or drugs to relax. These are more. You can see this woman facing a sink full of dishes, which is, causing her to feel highly, highly anxious, picking fights with others, overreacting. These are all symptoms of distress. So there are 4 different physical strategies that you can use and the same number of psychological strategies. And so the ones that we teach, and I'm going to go over them briefly, are for the physical strategies, relaxation techniques, what we call mini relaxation techniques, moderate exercise, and appropriate nutrition. The psychological strategies are cognitive restructuring, emotional expression, social support, self-nurturance, which is self-care, and combating perfectionism. So in terms of relaxation techniques, there are probably thousands of different relaxation techniques. The key is to find one that works for you. I have a lot of patients right now who are doing these 30-day yoga challenges. I can't stand yoga. I love progressive muscle relaxation. I like autogenic training. It's very easy these days to find, on YouTube or apps or whatever, where you can get free access to relaxation training. And I would try them and just try them out over and over again until you find one that actually works for you. The idea is to try to do a relaxation technique at least once a day. It has immediate effects, and then it has what's called a carryover effect, which means if you do a relaxation technique for 2 to 3 weeks, you start feeling more relaxed and less anxious 24 hours a day. The second is called mini relaxation techniques. It's based on diaphragmatic breathing. This is the first thing I teach all my patients. And you literally switch over to diaphragmatic breathing. There are a number of ways to what we call do a mini. You can count down from 10 down to 1 number for each breath, which is 10 and then exhale, 9 and then exhale down to 0. You can, as you inhale, count up to 4, and as you exhale, count back down to 1. And then you can just take a slow, deep breath in, hold it for a count of 3, then exhale and hold it for a count of 3. And these force you to focus on your breath, and it immediately brings down your state of anxiety. This is actually what I've taught a lot of embryologists when they're feeling anxious in the lab, to just take 30 seconds or a minute to do a mini. It'll bring down your heart rate and blood pressure and make you feel more relaxed and more in control. The times to do a mini is when you're aware you need it. Check into your body. Are you jittery? Is your heart beating? If you're feeling anxious, do a mini, and then start identifying situations which make you anxious and do a mini ahead of time. Do it prophylactically. Nutrition, there is no such thing as a bad food. What we tell our patients is to, if 80% of what they eat is the good stuff, the whole grains, the fruits and vegetables, etc., the other 20% can be what they want. There's a what the hell effect, which means if you're watching what you eat and you have a cookie or a brownie, you then have the what the hell effect and you eat like crazy the rest of the day. A way to balance that in the cravings that we tend to have when we're stressed is an 80-20 plan. 80% is the good stuff, 20% can be the stuff that you really want. Exercise is the most powerful stress management strategy we have. It's as effective against depression as antidepressant. It decreases cancer. Walking truly is one of the best forms of exercise. Any amount of exercise is better for you than none. I mean, the research now is showing like a minute of vigorous exercise can do something for you. The idea is to find a form of exercise which works for you that you're going to do regularly throughout the day. Even getting in 5 or 10 minutes at a time is going to benefit you. And right now, because so many of us are inside, getting outside gives you some of that very much needed vitamin D. Moving on to our automatic negative thoughts, what we teach our patients and I teach our staff is to start challenging your automatic negative thought patterns. And you need to ask yourself 4 questions. If you have this, oh my God, I can't get my work done today. Does this thought contribute to your stress? Yes or no? Where did you learn this thought? Is this a logical thought? And is this thought true? About 90% of the negative tapes that play over and over again in our head are not logical and are not true. And if we could restructure them to be logical and true, we would actually have the time and the energy and the resilience to handle the real stressors in our life. So just to ask yourself the next time you're anxious with a thought going through your head, is this a logical thought and is it true? And if it's not true, restructure it, even if it's a neutral thought. Social support is vital for our health. The definition is trusting somebody enough to confide in them. And these days, you want to schedule virtual tea parties or coffee breaks or wine tasting. Reach out to old friends and catch up. You know, the social support we get at work is incredibly important. And as we are now socially isolating, we're losing some of those connections. So figure out ways, you know, social distancing or whatever, keep up with people, have connections with people. It's incredibly important for your health. One way to deal with really challenging times in our life, the research has shown that keeping a journal or writing about our thoughts and feelings is a very effective way to get clarity, insight, and catharsis. And the research shows if you can write for 20 minutes a day for 4 days, it leads to rather exceptionally good psychological improvement. I do this also with most of my patients. If anything has happened to you that really troubles you and you can't seem to get rid of it, just write about it. And it's rather extraordinary how much that can help you. Self-nurturance is probably the most important thing you can do in your life in the lab and also during this pandemic. The idea is to put your needs on an equivalent level to those around you. And whenever I suggest to anybody they self-nurture, the answer is always, oh, I can't be selfish. Being selfish is caring for yourself at the expense of other people. Being self-nurturing is caring for yourself in conjunction with the needs of other people. You need to recognize what you need. You need to slow down. You need to take care of yourself. You know, one example, one of the exercises I give when I give a workshop is write down 20 things in your life which bring you joy. And then do as many of them as you can. So for the last 2 months, every week when I go to the grocery store, I've been buying myself flowers. You know, eat your favorite foods, light a candle, watch your favorite old movie. But every day there needs to be something that you do for yourself just to treasure yourself. Finally, perfectionism. I know at the first talk, they talked about being somewhat of a perfectionist is really important in the lab. And I do understand that. There are 2 kinds of perfectionism. There is maladaptive perfectionism, which means you are obsessed with getting everything perfect. You can't tolerate you doing anything that's not perfect. And you can't tolerate anyone else being imperfect. Adaptive perfectionism means that there are areas of your life when you are perfectionistic, but there are other areas where you're okay being average. And you know, the example I gave this morning is if I need my appendix out, I want my surgeon to be a perfectionist when he takes out my appendix. But I don't care if he can balance his checkbook. When I go on a plane, if that will ever happen again, when I go on a plane, I want my pilot to be a perfectionist when it comes to flying a plane. But I don't care if he's a good cook. So if you tend towards perfectionism, which I think most people in this profession do, focus on the things that are important to you in terms of being a perfectionist, and maybe give yourself a little bit of a break in other areas. So in summary, stress can lead to a lot of different physical, psychological, and behavioral symptoms. You need to tune into your body frequently to see if you can recognize when your body is telling you it's stressed. Tune in, address it. think about the impact the pandemic is having on your mental and physical health, and then try any of these different strategies. I mean, I tell my patients that this is like a buffet. You want to try everything and then continue the ones that you think actually are going to work for you. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you. I have one question. Do you think there are better coping strategies specifically for men versus what are better for women?
You know, it's a really good question, Marlane, and no one's ever asked me that before. You know,
Really?
yeah, I tend to see more women than men, although, you know, I have certainly seen a lot of men in my career. I would actually say that there are so many different stress management strategies. I think that the idea is to try out as many as you can and then find the ones that are right for you. It's not, you know, I think one of the problems for those of us who are old enough to remember the 60s and 70s is that when kids were in college, everyone was told to meditate and they were given a secret mantra. And so a lot of people started meditating. And the problem is meditation doesn't work for everybody. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. I liken relaxation techniques to ice cream flavors. So I wouldn't say that more men than women like vanilla versus chocolate, but I would never order chocolate ice cream for everybody. I would tell people to try different flavors and then continue and have the one that they really like. And, you know, I don't know that I've ever heard of true differences. I think that people need to try these out. And I could not tell any of our participants which technique I knew would work for them. I mean, those mini relaxations tend to be highly effective for everybody, but I think you have to try them out and see what works for you.
Thank you. All right. I think we're going to open it to multiple participants. Giles, do you
Yeah, sure.
want to start asking?
Thanks. Yeah, we spoke to Shaista before. Could we just go to a veteran embryologist, Jacques Cohen, and just to ask him if the job has changed at all as far as stress levels, or has things always been this way?
Well, unfortunately, I think yes. It always has been this way. And it's certainly not a subject we have talked about until 2014, and Jose's paper came out. This was, I wouldn't say it was taboo, but it was just not, we didn't record it, we didn't change it into data. But, you know, stress has always been obviously there. I don't think only among embryologists, it's in all the reproductive specialists, but maybe a little bit more in embryologists. It'd be nice if another survey we can find out. Maybe in your survey, I think those questions are asked, and we can find out what is the situation with nurses, nurse coordinators, and of course doctors. I'm shocked by Helen's data, 24.6%. That's before COVID. It's probably doubles or almost doubles with the stress that we are all undergoing now. Compared to the working population of 13.8%, I mean, it's just astonishing, but not all that surprising. I mean, the stresses are enormous. You're in charge of a future or no future, somebody else's future or no future. You're under duress from your colleagues, from the patients, and it's a very, very amazing environment. Nevertheless, very interesting. What surprises me is that paperwork comes into place, plays a role here in terms of stress. And it's probably because when we plan procedures, we don't think much of paperwork. It comes extra, but it's 50% of our time, right? Or almost something like 50%, either almost 50% or even more. So we need to, you know, make place for that. Unfortunately, we can't translate our thoughts into computer data. There has to be an intermediate, and so we have to type or dictate at best. So it is, but I'm very glad that Alice pointed out the possible remedies, and there are many, and they're very diverse, and I think they should be all tried. And so that there's a green light now, but we've never had that before. I mean, just honestly, I think we talked about that yesterday. Human resources, when I was educated, 0 hours, never had a minute on human resources. So certainly not stress. Certainly never talked about it in school.
Yeah, because this should be about solutions, or in fact shining a light and finding solutions. We can all think in any profession that we feel, of course, a little bit hard done by. And at this point, can I bring in Lisa Duran? She's one of our guest panelists. What would be the solution? And we've had many questions. How can we take the focus, if you like, off the laboratory, or for two sides, if you like, we're seeing in the questions, of coming together in a more productive way?
Yeah, so actually, as I'm watching some of the questions come in, I'm realizing that what I was about to talk about will hopefully answer some of those. There does seem to be almost two camps, if you will. So I do patient experience. I'm the chief experience officer for a network of fertility clinics throughout the U.S. And I will tell you that, my focus is, of course, patient experience, but team experiences as well. And what I have found in going into the clinics was that there are some assumptions out there. There are some major blind spots that we have. We don't truly understand the stress that you are all under. We don't understand. And oftentimes you're I know somebody else said it, you're left out of meetings. Perhaps you're not asked for your opinion. You're feeling like your opinion doesn't matter. You're not part of the decision making. We don't understand the staffing model. We're trying to run the business and service patients, and that's a major blind spot for us. So what you're doing today is critical, and that's bringing awareness to it. And I'm just so excited to continue to learn. I do have some solutions that I'll be talking about, I guess, in a little bit, Giles.
Sure. Okay.
Solutions are always good. I think we'd like to hear those. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I wanted to ask all the panelists, do you all think we are more stressed than other medical professions? I know that surgeons tend to be the most stressed among physicians. And I think we probably function as Dr. Cohen, I think you said this yesterday, that we probably function more closely to surgeons at a microscopic level. And I know I've seen studies showing that pathologists have high levels of some of the same neck and back issues. But does anyone have any other take or insight onto how embryologists might compare to other medical professions in specific? Yes, Dr. Castilla, please.
In the discussion of our study, we compare our prevalence of burnout syndrome. We have common is around 35%. Is much higher than the pathologists. Pathologists only 8%, but is similar to the surgeon and obstetrician. Probably this is the higher score or the higher prevalence in burnout syndrome. But I would like also to mention that the poor mental health, the score that we have obtained in this tool, a validate tool that we have used to measure the mental health of embryology, we have observed a poor mental health, similar to our patient with endometriosis or polycystic ovary. Sometimes we think that our patients have poor mental health, and we are not realize that we also have poor mental health, because when we have compared the result, it's similar. It's very similar.
I think Dr. Domar had, thank you, Dr. Castilla. I think Dr. Domar had a comment also about that.
Yeah, so I was actually supposed to last month give a week-long CME course for physicians on burnout prevention on a cruise, which of course got canceled. And so I had to get super updated on all the data. And in fact, surgeons and emergency room physicians tend to have the highest levels of distress and burnout because it's extremely vital. They're perfect under huge time pressure. And so it wouldn't at all surprise me if embryologists would have very comparable. I mean, a primary care physician, for example, or even an REI, for the most part, has more I don't want to say casual, but sort of face-to-face patient interactions, and it's not timed. And I was at a conference last year, and it was an infertility conference, and they showed a video of, I think it was an embryologist thawing eggs. I don't remember exactly what it was, but when they were showing the timer, and I don't remember who showed the video, but they showed a timer in terms of how much time the embryologist had to get every single step correct. And everybody in the audience was like on the edge of their seats waiting to see if they would meet it before the timer went off. And so it wouldn't at all surprise me. And I think it's a travesty that embryologists are not exposed to, you know, true stress management, burnout prevention, instruction. I mean, I know SREI for the fellows retreat about 6 years ago, maybe started adding a mental health professional to that Utah conference. But in general, I've done it, I think, 3 times. It's not to teach stress management to the fellows, it's to actually talk about different areas of mental health. But I think everybody in the REI field, because our patients are so extraordinarily distressed, and what we're doing is so crucial, I think everybody should get some at least basic training on how to care for themselves.
Thank you.
I would totally agree. All right, back to you, Giles.
Thank you. I'd like to show some preliminary data which we have from the survey, but of course, just while I'm getting ready, just to pass on to one of the architects of the questions, Dr. Bryan Tully, of course. Could you just tell us, and we've got a lot of questions about politics, and how can we in fact bridge that gap? And what would you look for in a working place that could in fact help that?
Well, it's tricky, of course, and a lot depends on how far the senior management feel that they are sharing the political issues with other staff and being honest and transparent with the pressures that they're coming onto. That's very key. I mean, I certainly was employed full-time in a police force, and it took me a lot of time to make good relations with senior police officers and to try to let them know that they needed channels in order to hear what junior police officers were saying. Otherwise, it would deteriorate into a lot of black humor and very angry situations, and then police union versus police management. That wasn't healthy at all. I actually found that narratives and stories where some senior police officers had been in very great trouble when they'd been junior, this really surprised staff, but I think it's important. I think some professions have got this right. I think the navies of the world have got this more right than some of the healthcare professions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So just the preliminary results we have so far. And we don't want to influence because it still is ongoing. So I'll please urge people to do finish the survey if they've started, or go to the website to enroll. The response has been great from all corners of the world. And I really think that if you're in embryology, you have a passion and you're dedicated. And if you weren't, then I think you'd leave quite quickly. So I really, although we talk about the negative side of this, we're picking up very interesting points in the survey, which is showing that yes, they have the stress, but people are battling on. So if you're happy and you know it, please still take the time to fill in the survey. I want it to be as accurate as possible. Now, preliminary results have shown that in relationship to length of being in the profession, we've had quite a good distribution over all groups, perhaps more over the over 20 years old, perhaps proving that old embryologists don't die, they just attain quality. It's the vast majority of women who have answered the survey. Perhaps that's because there are more women who are embryologists, but I want men to please show their feelings and to also answer that survey as well. One of the questions, of which there are many, is interesting finding And I'll leave you with this one question, which is if they've experienced exhaustion to a significant degree, and in fact, just over 50% have said they either strongly agree or at least they moderately agree. So we are trying to finish on a positive note. We have many questions. We will answer them and put them on the website. Themes are here. It is a subject which now we've brought out into the open. I hope that we can still continue to do this. But could we ask our experienced officer to give us, again, some things that we can do perhaps to better equip us? Over to you, Lisa.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. You know, the clinics can be your biggest advocates. They could also be the biggest barrier, and not only not helping during those stressful times, but could be contributing to a lot of the stress. And so there are just a few little nuggets that I wanted to share with you that might be helpful. One of the things that Dr. Tully talked about was that, you know, people don't always feel, and embryologists and andrologists don't always feel like they contribute to the purpose of the company or the mission statement or the why statement. And that is so important. One of the things that I found as I was traveling around to our clinics is I would come into the clinic and I would ask, how many babies have been born here? You know, how many, if our purpose is to build families and to help make dreams come true, how many babies have been born here? And then I'd go in the lab and ask the same thing. And 80% of the clinics could not tell me how many had been born there. And I realized that that's you know, we should be celebrating that purpose. In the lab, that's what you're creating life, you're helping to create life. It's an amazing, amazing thing that you do. And so, you know, there should be a big statement, you know, every year that's changed, or every 6 months that you celebrate that, you know, 20,000 babies have been born from this organization, you know, from this team, and you know, celebrate that. You know, that's the first thing. Make people feel like a part of this of the purpose, and celebrate the heck out of that. That's really important. The other thing is, you know, I talked earlier about how and I'll speak like as the business person in the clinics, that we don't understand. We don't understand the emotional stress. We need to get into the lab. That needs to be part of the onboarding program. So I would go to the practice manager, you know, whoever leads that clinic, if you're in a clinic, and say, is coming into the lab part of your onboarding program? It changed I actually went with Tony Anderson. I'll never forget that day. I asked him to go into the lab, and he suited me up and he showed me ICSI, and I think I cried for days. It was just life-changing for me. And at that moment, I was like, wow, what they do is just amazing, you know? So, you know, those are a few things. The other thing is to, you know, have a voice. Whether you're a lab director or whether you're in the lab yourself, find the strengths of each person. If there is somebody that is very strong in leadership, use them. You use them to come up with ideas. And I'm going to share one with you in a moment. You know, if there's somebody that's great with fun and philanthropy, you know, let them run with that. You know, let them help within your team. Find their strengths. And use those, right, to just bring collaboration, and then throughout the entire clinic. And make sure that you're in meetings. Ask to be in meetings. Go to the practice manager. When is the next meeting? I'd like a part in that. I'd like 15 minutes, right? Be assertive, be tenacious, get your voice heard. Your voice needs to be heard. And then the last little nugget I'm going to give you, especially if you're a lab director or a leader, is if you have read the 5 love languages, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a great book to be able to speak someone's language. Well, the author came out with the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. And I'll tell you, this is something that I teach that I love, because we all have a different language of appreciation. We all receive appreciation differently, whether it be quality time, you know, having lunch where I can share my ideas, or whether it be a public recognition or a gift card. We all have different languages of appreciation. When you understand that from each of your team members, you'll be able to deliver that and partner with the clinic and anyone in a leadership role with your team, and tell them what the language of appreciation for each of your team members is, and ask them to be intentional to recognize them. and to speak their language of appreciation. So those were a few things. You know what? We need to fill your buckets. You know, it's easy to get compassion fatigue. It's easy to get clearly I'm learning so much here. What you do matters. You are the behind the scenes heroes, and we need to take note, and we need to be supporting you. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you, Giles, for taking point on this. Efaristo. I really have appreciated and enjoyed being a part of this. So, and thank you to all of our attendees, for you all who have hung in there with us, which is the majority of you. Thank you. I hope you found some value from listening to our specialists. I hope you can find some time to apply the recommendations given here for managing stress as we all seek to open our centers in the potentially near future, which is in of itself will be stressful. And I want to really thank the remarkable team that puts these sessions together: Jacques, Peter, Thomas, Marianne, and Shaista. Those of us in front of the camera couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. Y'all are genius. And please join us next Tuesday for the 15th I3 session entitled Decision Making, AI and Art, Decisions by Clinicians and Embryologists Using AI Tools. So thank you all.